Hi, this is Privateer Station, and today we'll bring you day 617 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovich, Nikolai Feldman, Ukrainian journalist, and Yuri Romanenko, co-founder of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. I hope you guys appreciated the Q&A video that we posted yesterday. I think many of the questions were probably answered for those who still are rather puzzled about Alexei's position in regards to the current state of war. Our thanks go to Bill for his super thanks, of course, Jamer and Mormule, thank you for sticking with us and supporting our channel. And with this, let's deep dive into day 617, where it is now Valery Zaluzhny, Ukrainian commander-in-chief, who states that Ukraine is now at a stalemate on the front, basically highlighting the same topic that Alexei did a couple streams ago. Enjoy. Hi everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You're watching War Diary with Alexei Arestovich and Yuri Romanenko, also in the studio. Hello everybody. Alright, we discuss a whole set of events today that happened during that small period between our streams, and one of them is the article by Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny to Economist. Partly, Zaluzhny confirmed a bunch of different theses that we discussed here. In War Diaries, Alexei voiced them quite a few times about the stalemate and the positional war that currently we are experiencing on the front line. And I think there is a difference, however, between Zaluzhny and Arestovich's position, if you allow me to say so, because that thesis that you said in your stream about joining NATO and following Kissinger plan, his formula, this is not exactly what Zaluzhny implies in his article. Perhaps I'm wrong, but could you comment on this, please? All right, Nikolai, look, Zaluzhny said a very important thing. He said that on the front, we have a positional stalemate, and he compared it with the same stalemate in the First World War, when defense became so perfect with machine guns, with barbed wire, with minefields, that it was impossible to break through. And only when tanks were invented, and also a combined warfare was invented with aviation and artillery, finally the army started to break through and not just put in mud millions of casualties without any result. So what he is saying is that without significant technological jump, there will be no way to change this situation on the front. Second point, protracted warfare will be beneficial for Russia. Russia will emerge winner because they have more resources, they have deeper pockets in this regard in terms of human resources. And third, he is acknowledging his mistakes. This is very important because only people who learn, they acknowledge that they make mistakes. And he is saying that we are not perfect. We are fighting the war with old technologies and some of the new technologies against the similar class army. And he's basically saying, I thought it was A, and it turned out to be B. I thought it's C, and it turned out to be D. This is one of the strongest moves. I don't remember other politicians in modern Ukraine who can acknowledge their mistakes to that degree, besides him. And myself, I did resign after I made a mistake. He also stated that counteroffensive failed, and we are not to expect anything more beautiful to come out of it. And that is his resume. That is his summary of where we are. He is the commander-in-chief of everybody fighting on the front. Above him, there's only our president and maybe Minister of Defense in terms of economy, military economy, and military politics. So now you heard that, not from marginal and despicable Arestovich, but now you hear the same thing from Zaluzhny. What he says is that Ukraine needs to somehow get to the whole new qualitative and technological level compared to Russia. And given that Russia is also eyeballing the same goal, their new budget for the next year increased expenses for Ministry of Defense by up to a third of national budget. 33% goes to war. Today, by the way, we also saw the microchip board that was in the missile that hit Ukraine the other day, and that's American company manufactured. Yesterday in New York, 3 men were arrested for selling these technological elements to Russia. So we're facing that Russia is also trying to jump, right, technologically, and he is highlighting the same need for Ukrainian army. And I'm posing a question. So where do we get to this new technological step? Perhaps we should invest more in our military complex, military industrial production. Right. He doesn't go deeper into how we do that, but he posts the right question. He cannot discuss much of this because he's an official commander-in-chief of the military, so he's limited to what he can say. We are private persons, or if you want, newly baked politician, as I'm being called by a lot of people here criticizing me. But I think I can continue this topic, and I would say I do not see the basis for scientific technological advancement for Ukraine right now. I would say more. We need not the jump, but we need not just technological jump, but we need a jump as a country. That would include other industries too. We need to become more effective in other government institutes, and effectiveness of private government partnerships need to grow. And we need to increase and better our relations with our partners. Otherwise, we're looking at the possibility that we might lose Ukraine, which Zaluzhny warns about. Because if we go into the fight of potentials, into the long protracted warfare, Russia has more people. They will deplete much later than we do. So we need to find now ways to mobilize more effectively. Resources, people, money, technology, everything. I'm being accused here that I am putting all these criticism before elections. This is not about elections. I'm highlighting a very difficult situation we're finding ourselves in. When the United States have other issues to address, when European Union is failing to support us to a degree they wanted to, they promised to have 1 million artillery shells and only supplied 300,000. Meantime, North Korea, according to American estimates, supplied about 1 million shells to Russia. When we have issues and problems with our immediate neighbors, when our East European neighbors block our grain sales, when it is officially discussed the decrease of aid to Ukraine, of military aid to Ukraine, and we're facing a very difficult perspective in 2024, that military aid to Ukraine and economic aid to Ukraine will start dwindling. There are only 2 places where technological advantage can come to Ukraine from. That would be United States, number 1. They're the only country who has enough resources. Even the European Union doesn't have that. Thank you, Germany, for supplying us more aid, more tools, but it's only America who can literally provide us enough quantitative and qualitative jump in terms of supplies that would allow us to defeat Russia. Or we need to find some way to ramp up our own reserves and produce a boom in our military-industrial complex. And now President Zelensky, let's look at it this way. President Zelensky and his team managed to achieve tremendous success at the beginning of this war. They managed to create a huge coalition supporting us. They did grandiose work. I will not be denying that. Nobody can deny that. But this aid was not enough. It turns out to be not enough. Our analysts were wrong. Russian analysts were wrong. Western analysts were wrong as well. And the war turned out to be longer, on a larger scale, that needs different approaches. And you need strategically to increase everything now. Is Europe ready for that? The story with 1 million shells shows that they're not. 300,000 instead of 1 million. And United States are now in a different agenda. They're in agenda of tripolar issue between Moscow, Beijing, and Washington. They don't want China to have a secondary satellite which has military arms. So they're concentrating all their effort on themselves and their allies who will be aiding them to fight China if that conflict emerges. Right, Alexei, I want to chime in here, and I think Wall Street Journal has published the agenda for negotiations for President Biden with Xi Jinping of China. And the agenda is that they want to discuss control over nuclear weapons because they want to prevent destabilizing trilateral arms race between Beijing, Moscow, and Washington. And this meeting will be, for the first time, with that agenda since the times of Obama. Discussion doesn't mean official implementation of any limits in each country. This is just a discussion. But recently there was a publication that China is planning to increase their nuclear arsenal. And Russia, I think also today said that they're about to continue with their nuclear tests. And of course, for United States right now, one of the key questions is how to avoid nuclear arms race, not the usual arms race, but nuclear arms race, and do not create a situation when Beijing will get a tap into Russian arsenal or will grow their arsenal to the size of Russian and create a situation when United States is going to be facing two nuclear arsenals of two very big countries. That will really be uncomfortable for the United States. And this is one of the questions that you posted in recent streams about strategy of the United States and how to make sure that Russia is aligned with the United States more than with China, how they did in the Second World War when Soviet Union started essentially in the same campaign with Hitler after Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and ended in the coalition against Hitler when Hitler attacked USSR. So some people may consider that discussion about nuclear war is not serious, but I want to say that for politicians, this is definitely a serious, a threatening situation. Two arsenals that are comparable, each of which is comparable with American, is absolutely unacceptable for American politicians. None of the American leaders would go for that. More reasonable politicians will kick anybody out who says it's okay when Russia and China are in the same camp against the United States and they have doubled the nuclear efforts, resources. That's why the United States is trying so hard to figure things out with China, to try to make sure that Russia doesn't fully jump in bed with China, and to still prepare for a possible hot conflict with China. This is the main task that American politicians are carrying out right now. And on this background, it's very naive to expect a sudden increase of military aid to Ukraine. Something very unusual needs to happen here. For example, Russia would formally join China, and then maybe United States will give us enough arms to weaken it to the max as the military ally of China. But as you see, this also does not happen. Putin keeps intriguing and keeping his own position. As recently United States confirmed, they're still negotiating with Russia. So states have to react to all these things happening. They're in a somewhat reactive position given the situation in the Middle East as well, where they're bogged down to their neck and they need to maneuver between Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Israel. And in this regard, look, we do think similar. Bloomberg is writing today that Israel and Hamas conflict had withdrawn attention from Ukraine. And since there are more right-leaning politicians dominating in Congress, many people should forget about more aid to Ukraine. Biden says it's not a problem, but it's also an elective year and an election year. And Russia still getting additional aid from North Korea, while America and Europe are not supporting Ukraine enough. A couple of Russian pranksters talked with the Prime Minister of Italy, and she did confirm in that conversation that they're tired from this conflict. They're getting to the truth of the matter, that we are looking for a way to resolve this matter. This is a hard truth for Zelensky, but this is what Bloomberg published today. I did state today that we need to get on the vector of negotiations with Russia. Now this is being hysterically discussed by people who are screaming that Ukraine will be fighting to the borders of 91. All right, so let's address that matter. Those who are screaming that, those who want to continue fighting till 95 right now, 91 right now, Chief Command Officer Glavkom Zaluzhny is telling you that in order to not even win, but just hold the front line, you need to increase your military capability several fold in new technologies and also in quantity. We need not just many drones, we need a lot of drones that can not be defeated by Russian radio interference right now, which is difficult to do. And in reality, in the world politics, they're talking about decreasing aid to Ukraine. So for us, in order to keep the situation, we need a lot of help. And current political discussion is not only going about increasing and supporting Ukraine, it actually goes about decreasing that aid. So what possible truce can give us? This is not the only version of what can happen, but that's one of the obvious. And I know in Ukraine it's kind of forbidden to discuss that option in society, but I am bringing it now. And many people, I understand why, many people, including myself, initially promised a quick and successful victory. And we're not talking about making peace with Russian aggression or not appeasing Putin. We are seeing the situation when we could not win in a short frame. Now we need to find a way to win long term. We can touch upon another topic that we have not discussed before. It's not exactly orderly in our army. It is not a spit in direction of Zaluzhny. It's specifically, I'm highlighting the legal side of our military. So this is more finger pointing at the Congress of Ukraine. There is no correct division between the president and the chief commander of military forces. When there is no clear delineation, then you have the same discombobulation all the way down to the commander of company. And our laws are not really supportive of how we wage war. Our military industrial complex is also facing a lot of deficiencies. So what possible truce can give us if we follow, for example, Kissinger's variant, which upset a lot of people, right? When was it brought up? About a year ago. I think we discussed it about a year ago here on the streams. So one of the main tasks that we face now, we need to bring our society to reality, because here's the fork. We need to increase quantity and quality and technology of our means on the battlefront, and our allies are telling about dropping it. You see that fork? That's the one chasing us. So a short truce, call it freezing the conflict, call it whatever you want. And then possible future development according to the Korean or Germany after the Second World War scenario. It means that we're not accepting the loss of our territories. We continue keeping the position that we are going to return them politically. We're ready to not return it militarily right now, for the moment, but we definitely are not abandoning our territories, and the framework for that is the change of regime in Russia. And I want to highlight here that Rasmussen also suggested a similar formula with Georgia, known as Rasmussen formula, when Georgia and Ukraine could be accepted to NATO with the territories that are currently controlled by their governments and the territories that are lost because of actions of the aggressor. Ukraine basically would give a promise that they're not going to use military force to return them, and will use only political measures to return those territories in the same way as it happened with German Democratic Republic and Western Germany. So if we're talking about Kissinger, since we're bringing him up over and over again, it seems like he talked about that after Lugano, and also this summer he was remembering a similar formula. And this is exactly what Alexei is talking about. All right. So look, in this case, we get what? We get a respite. Respite is the time one. Time one allows us to solve some tasks, to bring order to the system of our defense, to our military and other force enforcement institutions. We need to grow better cadre. We need to create lifts for those talented ones. We need to bring our economy back up. We need to increase the capabilities of our military-industrial complex. We need to figure how we cooperate with Poland and Romania, because the missile can hit our factory here, but it will not hit one there, or in Czech or Slovakia or other country that is neighboring us. We can discuss the program of Ukraine joining NATO, right, in expedited way. Then, in general, the question is solved. The only matter would be to await the change of powers in Russia and take our territories back. I'm 101% sure that the next Russian leadership will be more reasonable than Putin. This war is basically hinging on Putin and Shoigu and a couple of people around them who still insist on its continuation. So, two main objections are as follows: that Russia will not follow through with any truce, and second, that they'll use it for preparation of the second phase of offensive. So, here, let me ask you this. Imagine there is no truce. Imagine we are in a protracted war shooting at each other from trenches. Will Russia use this situation to try to build up its potential for the next wave? They will, right? What about us? If we could do that, I think we would be doing it already. But so far, I'm not seeing any motion to rapidly increase our military production capabilities. It will bring us to Russia being faster, preparing faster for the next big round than we do. We can only succeed if we somehow stop our global expenses for war and we get some money to either from friends or some otherwise resources we can throw into the amping of military production complex and growing the effectivity of our country as a whole. I'm also thinking that as long as Putin is alive, the second round is inevitable. And we're only discussing, are we going to be in a positional fight on the front, preparing for it, or are we going to be in a truce, preparing for it? If there is an active truce, an active ceasefire in effect, then we do have a chance that we can prepare for the second round of second hot round of this war with the aid of our allies and friends, with the United States and Europe, that we can somehow manage in the next couple of years to grow our technological advancement to the level where Russia would refuse to continue the second round because they would understand that their price that they'll pay would be much steeper than the one they're paying now. Because positional warfare is absolutely not in our favor. Thesis number one: current war cannot be not positional, and positional warfare is not in favor of Ukraine. That is where the question about truce becomes reasonable. Why is it also possible? Because Russia is also in deep shit at the moment. They have issues with economy, not as bad as we do, but still do. Their military production is definitely at a critical point. They can repair and restore way fewer numbers than they're losing here every month on the front. So they potentially can consider that. All right, a quote and a question. A quote from Zaluzhny first, at the end of the interview, that was published in The Economist because it's together. It's an interview and an article together about situation on the front. And I would suggest people read the full article. There are a lot of interesting theses there. So General Zaluzhny is really trying to prevent this war from becoming a positional trench warfare. The problem of such a warfare is that it may last for years and it will really tire out Ukrainian society and country. First World War led to the collapse of four empires and a revolution in Russia. And Putin is also counting on waning of support of the West. General Zaluzhny has no concerns that, no questions that protracted war is definitely going to be more favorable for Russia. They have more people and they have a bigger economy overall. And it's also a feudal state where the cheapest resource is human life. And we are a different country. We're a democracy which values the lives of our people. And the longer the war continues, the more difficult it will be for us to maintain, to preserve the lives of our soldiers. And we need to find somehow a technological advancement because eventually, otherwise, we'll find that we don't have enough people to fight this war. So that's the quote from him. Very basic stuff. Thank you, Yuri. We are in a positional warfare, and there is not a chance to go through it. Positional warfare is disadvantageous for Ukraine. So what's the solution for such an equation? There is only one option, that might change it different drastically is if United States will drastically increase their aid, their military items transferred to Ukraine. But it doesn't answer the question if China and Korea will increase their support of Russia as well. And here's a recent example. Europe managed to provide us 300,000 artillery shells. Korea provided Russia about 1 million. Here is a simple parity for you. Of course, Korean capabilities are not endless, but China has a lot more. And it's much easier to fight a proxy war with the forces of Russia than direct clash with China. But if we manage to be successful here in one way or another, we might actually produce a space for maneuver for the United States to resolve their issue with China. So when Stoltenberg comes out and the head of NATO comes out and says that Ukraine might consider joining NATO and temporarily agree to not take back the occupied territories via military efforts, not to give the territory to Russia, but just to not use military might to take it back. He is not pulling it from his head, right? He's not fantasizing there on the podium, not because he wants to be elected as the president of Ukraine. He is saying, as the person who has full information, who is in comm with a lot of global leaders, and who knows the overall pattern. They're definitely not enemies for us. He doesn't want Ukraine to be defeated. Kissinger doesn't want Ukraine to be defeated. But they're comparing real situation, real balance of power. And it is difficult, but it's a main task for us to make sure we make our people consider the reality the way it is. Of course, there are overheated expectations. Of course, they're thinking that our military will be able to win this war and the West still continues to support us. Well, problem is that we are fighting. We're not literally breaking Russia apart at the front. Situation is more difficult. Let me clarify it here. I'm reading through his thesis, and I'm reading what he's writing, that we should not underestimate Russia. Its military-industrial complex is growing, despite unprecedented sanctions. Our partners in NATO are also growing their production capabilities, but for that they need at least a year, and in some cases, such as aviations and guiding systems, at least 2 years. Do I understand your thought correctly that in the framework of general superposition of United States and China, these 2 years may become decisive years, and China will either go fully into confrontation with the United States or it will not. And these years can be used for growing military capabilities within the NATO countries, to also give Ukrainian military to refit everything they need to on the front line, and only then to return and discuss the possible defrosting of the conflict, right? What does the truce afford us, Nikolai? It allows us to refit, restore, replenish our military forces. And it allows us enough time for the West to revamp their military production. Because the problem is that if this doesn't happen and positional warfare ensues, Russians will be burying tens of thousands of their people here in our fields. We will be burying thousands in ours in return, but it will still be slowly depleting us. And those additional military items that the West will be able to still provide us with will only be able to sustain this fight. Russia will not be able to break through. They will not be able to grab more land from Ukraine. The storm of Avdiivka just shows you that even if they really exert a lot of their effort, they cannot take a small village so fast. So, unfortunately, the West support can also not provide us, in this case, cannot ensure that we do stockpile some of the resources, because if they're giving us 10 shells and we're using 10, there is nothing that's saved. Okay, so when our high military commander is saying that stalemate warfare is a trap, and if we want to break through, we need all these technological advances. And he basically is implying that we'll need a year or two, right? Exactly, a year or two. But knowing how things work in the world, you may multiply it by 2 at least. So once again, inside Ukraine, we're not talking about elections. We're talking about drastic increase of the effectiveness of our government institutions. And my position is that current president and his team, they're at a limit of their competence. They cannot provide for this jump in effectiveness. That's why we need either a coalition government or new elections that will allow to break through here. Externally, we need to correlate our positions with the Western allies, with all of them. First of all, of course, United States. We need to understand the construct they're bringing to the table. What do they want? And then we need to put a calculator between us and figure it out what we can do, what we cannot do, and go from planning by wants to planning by capabilities. I will ask a scary question now of our viewers who are saying no, we'll be fighting to the borders of 1991. Tell me, please, who promised you that after you reach the borders of 1991, the war will stop? All right, so we got to the borders. We buried 350,000, 250 or 150 dead thousands, and then maybe a million cripples. Who promised you that the war will cease at this point? Why would it stop at this point? And that's it. That's we as a government have failed the preparation to this war, and the West has failed as well. Now we are at the stalemate. Everything that is being provided to Ukraine is being spent on the front. We cannot provide for cumulative effect. We cannot store and stockpile any of the resources. And the West and us are fighting with a coalition that has a rather strong potential, especially for transfer of the basic arms. It's not weaker than the Western. It's probably even higher than the West, especially on the artillery shells, for example. And then there is a discussion in this triangle where Russia will end up strategically, because if Russia and China joins their nuclear potentials, that's a scary dream for the West. They would not want that situation to happen. So we need to become very adequate rapidly. We need to increase adequacy of our politics, external and internal. We need to find the right niche to get into the strategy of the West, collective strategy, as a reliable partner who can promise and deliver on the promises. Biden, on his summit, actually acknowledged that we are part of the West. When Putin was visiting China, Biden did come out and say that Ukraine is on our side of the fence. But this is a compliment. This is an acknowledgement, but it doesn't mean yet that we changed our partnership qualities, that we became any better, because in the way we behave ourselves in the conflict with Poland, in the conflict with Britain, we're quarreling on some matters with the United States, it raises serious questions and adequacy of current administration and current Ukrainian politics, because they see we're not exactly a comfortable team player for them. Do you think on this situation, on this precipice, the military aid will grow or will dwindle? And I'm posting that question to our viewers. If our allies do not see us as a good team player, that we do not always deliver on our promises, that we refuse to see things from a team viewpoint, not from our own personal interests, but from a collective viewpoint as a team. If you think there are evil people on the Western side who want just to attack Ukraine, no, they're not. There are a lot of people fighting for increase of aid to Ukraine, but there is a larger group of people growing now. The whole trend is growing, that famous 12 points of Republicans who are posting questions about we do not understand where do we send money, why do we spend it this way, and misunderstanding or not understanding of the goals poses these questions. The whole political culture is based on that. They need to understand the goal, they need to form the budget based on this goal and the plan, realistic plan, and we are not supporting them in this process. We're an unreliable player right now. We cannot put the interests of a team above our interests, given that team interests are actually concerning with our interests too. Our interests are part of that. So until we become more adequate, both internally and externally, there will be nothing but protracted positional warfare where we'll be losing. That's exactly what Zaluzhny is talking about, in my view. Alexei, there are several important points here. And first of all, it's obvious that any negotiations with Russia cannot start before Ukraine gets guarantees of security from the West, especially from the United States. Otherwise, without these guarantees, this is going to be a complete foobar. Let's call it what it is. Sure, it will be a suicide. I thought it's obvious, but yeah, if we need to underline that, we can definitely say that. We can only negotiate with Russia if we have significant guarantees from the West. President and his team are also talking about that we need to get guarantees from all the countries of the world, not just United States. That's what we were talking about in Malta as well. Without guarantees, there is no sense in doing it. Even with guarantees, nobody can vouch for Putin not breaking all these agreements. But without any guarantees, we are just facing a significant deterioration of our position. So we won't even go to do any negotiations without guarantees. So let's indeed write out the whole formula. So guarantees first. Right. Guarantees in the morning, negotiations in the evening. Right. Serious guarantees that would put Russia in face of significant worsening of its position if they violate these agreements. And only then possible ceasefire and possible negotiations. So, Alexei, you mean that in case of us expressing some initiative after we get guarantees from the United States and we suggest we negotiate some truce, Russia may actually violate? What happens then if they get more weapons, more arms from the East? Do you think they'll still break through and do you think they can refuse to negotiate with us? Well, we only can see that in time. But the problem is that, let's say the West gives us 10 shells. We manufacture maybe 4, but we shoot daily 20. How long can the situation last? When we can only restock 14 and we're using 20. Sooner or later, that situation will bring us to completely depleted warehouses. Same situation with rotation of military, with training of the military cadre, with picking the better ones to advance their training and position. We're behind in everything. We can dedicate the whole stream to situation in Russia. Their situation is even worse. They spent their cadre here in Ukraine, and they're failing to train their new ones. And their lower rank commanders, like sergeants and company commanders, they're dying in droves, so they don't have enough expertise to train new soldiers. So everything is bad too, but one way is we would, for example, have achieved success in Crimea. We could have set to negotiate with Russia. That would be a good position. By the way, Zaluzhny says that initially we calculated that in 4 months we had a chance to get to the mouth of Crimea. And people are now attacking me for my predictions previously. Yeah, I was looking at the same numbers that Zaluzhny did. We came to the same conclusions, but situation changed. And that was the ideation of the collective West, that if we succeeded in the South, we then could have negotiated further. But since heavy equipment was transferred much later, tanks came at the nick of time, airplanes are still not there, Russia had enough time to dig in and fortify. So effective counteroffensive stalled and did not go as far as we wanted to. Now we need to become more adequate. Now we need to rebalance the situation and to see the world the way it is. Inadequate guys, they don't end well. And now that we also have a supported piece of information from the commander-in-chief, which is generally matching what we've been discussing here, and we need to start planning our future actions according to the current situation. You cannot keep shooting 20 artillery shells a day if you're manufacturing together with your allies 14, regardless of how many you mobilize. Even if you mobilize 2 million people in Ukraine, then all of a sudden you're out of bullets, right? And then what you do? Okay, let me add some stuff here, Alexei. There was a question in the chat, and I did want to address it. I want you to highlight the answer to it. Yuri Bonder is writing us, if Russia would demand the whole ocean front of Ukraine down to Transnistria, what shall we do? I think these are more fantasies, because Zaluzhny in his interview also outlined that when he went to Avdiivka to check positions, he's saying that on the screens of our monitors when I was there, we saw 140 destroyed Russian vehicles that were destroyed in just hours after they were reachable by our artillery. And then some of them were fleeing, the remnants of it were fleeing from the drones. And our operators are great at directing these drones at the equipment. But it's the same picture that Russian officers see when our troops are trying to get through their barriers, through the lines in the south. Current warfare basically keeps everybody under surveillance. The simple fact is we see everything that they do, they see everything that we do. To break out of that dead end, we need something new. just like the powder was back several centuries ago, the Chinese invented, that we still use up to this day. So what Zaluzhny is talking about, now there is some balance of powers that is expressed in the fact that Russia has a lot more personnel to throw in the grind, and they have more to supply. We have high precision munitions from the West. We have high precision guns, artillery, but this only allows us to keep certain balance. It doesn't allow us to change the situation. And his fears expressed at the end, his concerns expressed at the end of this article, is that we need to resolve our question with technology in order to switch the balance in our favor. Otherwise, if the war continues, the fact that we have 3 or more times less people resource in our country, this will bring our system down. And then the enemy might have an advantage in the long term. And that's, I think, what Zaluzhny is sending, that hidden message in his article. So he's basically pointing towards the politicians. He's essentially sending the ball to the office of Zelensky and to the Western politician, right? Guys, let's figure something out with technology. Give us some ATACMS, give us more radio interference systems, more other missile types. The whole front is screaming for radio interference. Or look for a solution in the political pain that Alexei is talking about. And yeah, he's not talking about the political side because he cannot as an officer of the military, but he definitely sent the ball to the court of politicians. Listening to us, one can think that everything is horrible, we're dying, Russia is about to win. This is not so. If that was the fact, Russia would not be suggesting negotiations, and I would not be suggesting negotiating with Russia. In this case, I would be on the pulpit saying, don't fret, we can win it, we can do it, and I will morally go out and support our country. But I know that we are not in that situation. I know how difficult and rough the situation is in Russia. Our things are bad too, but yeah, both sides are in a stalemate. Both things are horrible. They cannot win in the current position in the short term. But now we're facing the battle of potentials, in which we don't have enough technology and enough people. And they only don't have technology, they have a lot of people. So that balance is not in our favor. You know, Alexei, what else we can say? That we need the picture, we need a clear picture of the long victory. When we see the logic of our actions, we will get our optimism back. Because very often you've been accused that at the beginning of war you said 2 or 3 weeks, and you've explained that 200 times after that. That was the logic of the moment. Well, yeah, I was participating in Istanbul negotiations and everybody was going to sign a peace agreement in 2 to 3 weeks at that time, so I knew what I was talking about. So what I wanted to pay attention to is that what Zaluzhny is saying here, we are being directed towards the logic of a long will, a long strategy like Azerbaijan did. When in the 90s, Azerbaijan suffered several defeats from Armenia, lost Karabakh and several surrounding areas. I think there were 7 regions next to it that they lost. They were in a situation of a total loss, and they stopped the war. We thankfully are not in this situation. No, we're not, right? Azerbaijan was in a more dangerous position, in a much worse condition. Azerbaijan was incomparably worse, right, Yuri? So Russia was manipulating both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and they were putting wood in the fire on both sides. But at the end, Ilham Aliyev, he continued the business of his father, essentially. He created a whole construct. I think what Azerbaijan did is a great example, a model example that we can look at and learn from. So first of all, he said, we're not going to give our lands, ever. That's when people come out and say, point fingers at us, accusing that we're going to give some lands away. Right, Yuri, let's put it hard here. We're not going to give our lands. And I would say even more here, my personal goals are way beyond the borders of 1991. You know, my position that Ukraine needs to be the center of the Eastern Europe and needs to be defining the politics of Eastern Europe. So my plans are going way beyond that. All right, so Alexei, Azerbaijan was working in that logic. They created a good international construct first. They brought transnational Western companies that started working oil and gas, built the pipeline Baku-Ceyhan, invested money, invested their effort, and invested their billions of dollars worth of interest. And they started seeing Azerbaijan as their agent of influence in that area. They needed to defend their money, and they defended the interests of Azerbaijan. And that's how Britain and other countries were allowed to enter the scene, including United States as well. Later, on the next stage, what Azerbaijan started to do, they started to refit their military to bring them closer to NATO standards, using the experience of Turkey, which is a NATO member, established a close cooperation with Turkey, which is a NATO member. And they also set very good relations with Israel. Azerbaijan, like Turkey, has a very good relation with Israel. They went to different commissions in Europe. They were doing consulting sessions how to resolve this problem on the border. Right, Minsk Accords, they had their own Minsk process like we had in Ukraine, right, Alexei? But starting at some point, Aliyev decided to build along the border with occupied territories more airfields, more hospitals. When I was in Karabakh in 21, Azerbaijans were telling me, we don't know why in our village with 500 people in it, a huge hospital is being built. And we only understood that when the actual war actions, military actions started to happen on the border in Karabakh. But in those days, earlier, Aliyev was not in a hurry. He needed to get certain strategic advantage in the south first, because there was a height, Lalat Tepe, in the south that actually had Armenian front positions that could observe everything what's happening in Azerbaijan. So there was a very short war in 2016. I think it lasted for 2.5 days. This was a war for that height, for that Mount Lalat Tepe, which actually solved the result of the campaign 4 years later in 2020. Because after Azerbaijans took that position, they managed to bring the armored fist and some troops to that place, and having done several distracting maneuvers in the north, they hit where Armenians were not expecting, and then they went through Jabrail and some other settlements. There was the main breakthrough, and they got all the way to Shusha. But even after taking Shusha, Aliyev refused to continue taking the whole Karabakh. So he froze the war again. Right, Yuri, he went for another compromise, and he achieved his result a couple years later. So, dear viewers, Azerbaijan spent 25 years to return this land. Not to hope to return, they actually returned it in the format and the whole entirety of it. And they did it in their pace, however they could, and they solved their geostrategic tasks that allowed them to unite their nation. And Aliyev will be a figure in their history as a great leader who solved the governmental task. And this is an example of a long strategy. And yes, I understand, in Azerbaijan there were probably a lot of people who were shocked in the 90s from what was happening. They just had refugees from Karabakh, hundreds of thousands from those occupied regions by Armenia that were next to Karabakh. But right now, the irony of the destiny is that they are being returned to those places. They're getting their villages rebuilt. I was in Agdam a couple years ago, and they had a huge project for a town that has about 100,000 people in it. And they started with technoparks and some future production and all. And they started that project not in the 20th when they got the territory back. They started preparing it years before that. So by the time when they entered the town, they already had projects of the future airports and other facilities and buildings they needed to rebuild here. And that's what they started doing when they got the territories back. So when I was in Fizuli airport, as I was watching the infrastructure being developed, how quickly they're doing that, they were showing me the plans, I was shocked how the country who managed to get out of that Soviet Union pen, and which also has its own problems, corruption, authoritarianism, that of course exists, have no illusions about it. But regardless, they found enough power in themselves and some rational approach to afford the victory in the way they wanted it to. And let me add here, Yuri, I'm getting questions about the destinies of people on the occupied territories. I think this agreement, if we eventually get to that after serious guarantees, the question would be posed about our citizens on those territories. At the very least, we need to achieve three things. First, return of all prisoners. Second, amnesty for all whom they consider to be pro-Ukrainian or partisan movement or Ukrainian agents from this moment onward. And third, an opportunity for people to leave the occupied territories and move to Ukraine. And also, there is a fourth, to allow people to manage their own property on the occupied territories. So, sell the apartments which they could not have sold for the last 10 years already and get their money from their investments there. Without that, there is no reason to discuss it. If Russia will never go for it or will deceive us, that means we'll continue fighting. Nobody is refusing from the armed fight. We're just talking about aggregating and stockpiling some of the potential and changing strategy of a short-term war, which did not bring us to where we wanted it to a long-term strategy. Our rhetoric and our estimation of the situation is not about exchanging territories for peace. These are our territories and we will bring them back. They're ours according to constitution. We have to bring this back. We do not exchange people for peace. We need to bring them back. We just don't want to kill tens of thousands of people, including on the occupied territories, continuing positional warfare, which it is a scary proposition. But yeah, sometimes you can sacrifice people when you have certain goals you can reach. But when it's just a positional warfare without any advancement, it is a waste. And then we're also looking at a long victory, fighting with the enemy who is stronger than us economically and has a larger human potential than we do, and is just generally stronger militarily than we are. That's it. Well, okay, finish it, Alexei. And we should not forget that many other things may happen in a big triangle in the nearest future between Russia, China, and Washington. And we have also seen what may happen in Russia. Prigozhin's mutiny, an uprising in Makhachkala, and winning some time is definitely better than grinding your own people in the positional fight. Our short blitzkrieg didn't work out this summer, so we need to figure out a strategy for the long one. All right, Alexei, when you say so about possible events that may unfold, is that you imply that Putin may die in Russia? Yeah, something may happen with Putin, right? Colleagues, I think we should not be continuing digging deeper into this. I think we outlined it rather clearly. No, Nikolai, it's actually a lot of questions in the chat I'm monitoring, and they're posting a bunch of questions. You think they maybe have started watching us a bit later and just catching up on the elements that we have discussed already, that we went through? So, to avoid the risk of going in circles, I think it's pretty clear. Alexei interpreted your view on our commander-in-chief position. Yura, you also chimed in just fine. Nikolai, we'll have to keep explaining that in thousands of more streams. Right. I think if something is sharply against what you are talking about today, we'll see those reactions and we can discuss them in the next issues of our war diary, which goes usually, what, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, depends upon how you fly in, right? Exactly, depends upon the travels. Okay, I suggest we go to the conclusive part of our diary, to Avdiivka, and comment what's happening there. We have a report of Yuri Butusov, Ukrainian journalist, who is saying directly that the 2nd of November, a very sharp date for us, that it is a critical state right now, and there is a serious risk of losing that town. Now, it was, what, a week and a half since you started ringing the gong about Avdiivka, and this is not the first confirmation of the criticality of the situation there. So Butusov, he is also a very well-known observer, and he is commenting that Russian troops have definite moves in the north, in the south. They're continuing massive attempts to storm our positions and to grow their pincers towards each other. There is a very good mechanized brigade that we have there that was masterfully defeating most of the attacks of Russians, and that 110 brigade revealed itself to be super professional. But as I understand, the flanks are now being held not by that brigade, but some other troops, and they're not as successful as the 110th. And he's arguing that this probably should be given in the hands of 110th to provide the cover of the flanks. And he's basically posting a question to the civilian society of Ukraine at large that if we do want to keep Avdiivka, we need to provide a ton of drones, a lot of cameras and other equipment that they request, and we need to concentrate our efforts seriously on holding that strong post. So my first commentary, are we gathering anything on that stream? Yes, we do. I will say which brigade it is in the links underneath it. It is for 59th Brigade. There is a request for a drone, for Mavic, Motorola radios and batteries. That next stream we should bring our fundraiser request at the beginning, then repeat it in the middle, and then conclude by the end of the stream, because people just don't have time if we wait till the end. So, dear viewers, please help with this brigade. They're helping our warriors there at Avdiivka. So that's exactly the area that we're discussing, the hot zone. So the link is under the program and in the chat. Please continue to support and please help them. We have a lot of requests, and today we're gathering some for 59th Brigade. Regarding Avdiivka, I know it's hard to believe, but I do know a bit about waging warfare. About what you were saying about a week and a half ago, it was visible for many military professionals, because when your defense area is semi-encircled by the enemy, it is always a difficult position. And when your enemy brings the forces of 3 armies to that area and doesn't count the losses, then it's a really dangerous and difficult position. And if you also take in consideration that the distance between the pincers is about 10 miles, so everything can be shot through with artillery, this is, again, a very difficult situation. So back then I was pessimistic and I was warning that we may lose it. Now the same statement is made by Yuri Butusov, another guy who is rather professional in his statements, and he knows what he's talking about as well. And I would just wish that our command would realistically understand the current situation and would not let this trap close and would withdraw our troops before this happens while it's still possible. If soldiers are saved, we can take it back sooner or later. If we lose our soldiers, then we don't have this option. We should not be leaving their people. We should not be wasting our people resources for territory. You cannot bring professionals back, so you need to be very professional in how you wage your wars, and by any means you should avoid leaving people in the encirclements for any political or iron will statements. The way that we demonstrated our will, I think the whole world saw that. And that tactical situation will only be helpful to us, to our troops, who also will understand that our command is professional and doesn't want to waste them and actually knows how to withdraw from the positions when it becomes senseless to defend them. And the front has been hot. Enemy was also waging attacks on Kupinsk direction. It's also difficult there. And we continue advancing near Bakhmut and near Takmak. And we can also talk about the left bank of Dnieper and Kherson area, and that's not a secret anymore. Now these small tactical strongholds on the left bank that we had for a while are now growing to become operative size, and it's only 80 kilometers to the Crimea mouth. Russian troops are not the best in that area, and newly arrived General Teplinsky, who was the paratroopers command previously, his command post supposedly was hit by Storm Shadow, and according to Russians, he is wounded, so not so easy for them too. They understand how much they have to pay for fighting the war here. And we will continue analyzing the situation on the front, but such a material as Zaluzhny's article, we could not discuss. It is an important milestone. That's why today's diary is mostly split for a military political situation in relation to the article, and now a brief analysis of what's happening on the front. And that positional stalemate and approximate equality of the actions of both sides, it's reflected on the front. We are advancing in three parts of the front, three segments, and they advance at two others. So 2 by 3, 3 by 2, that will continue for a while. The question is, any of us, if can we change the situation qualitatively? At this moment, neither them nor us can change it. And only something radical, some serious, drastic changes can change that situation. And then you can switch to the beginning of this stream and listen to the answers over there again. I think that's a good ending for the stream. I think we can conclude it for today. And the rest of the news we can move for the evening stream on Saturday to not continue walking in circles, right? All right, I think we'll have a lot of questions. And I suspect we should end with an algorithm, right? The logic of our actions. So there would be some metrics that we can address in the future. So Ukraine first needs to negotiate with the West about guarantees, start an honest conversation, given that the West is somewhat leaning to that solution as well, about the limits of possible. Start an honest conversation there. Ukraine needs to absolutely get ironclad guarantees so we do not run into a situation that is described in a great article in the National Interest about deceit and the story of Ukraine losing its nuclear potential. It's a great story about nuclear disarmament, how we were disarmed back in the days. And obviously, Ukraine needs no Minsk or Belarus memorandum or anything. Yeah, trust me as a person who spent 2 years negotiating the Normandy format and Minsk negotiations and later the Turkish. So that is not an option. Okay, so first step is negotiating with the West. The West, once we reach some agreements between the West and Ukraine, then the West can start the track of negotiating with Russia. And then we start forming the contours of possible truce and agreement. And then Ukraine can engage in direct negotiations with Russia. No, I think there should be an intermediary who is leading these negotiations. It has to be a strong guarantor who would be guaranteeing us support and guaranteeing butthurt for Russia in the case of their violation of this agreement. And Zelensky was highlighting that too, by the way. It's just that he's talking about the borders of 1991 and leading the war to that. But once again, I see the contradiction there, because fighting to the borders of 1991 doesn't mean that the other side will stop. And these guarantees should be akin to what Israel has. Once Israel ran into trouble, 2 American aircraft carrier groups came over to defend it if anything happens. And these are the guarantees we're talking about Ukraine. And we need the truce not to let Russia settle the new territories, but we need it to collect enough potential and stockpile enough resources for future actions. And we will need to work hard in order to increase our potential, because Russia will not be doing nothing. We need to actually be more effective and more productive than Russia. And this by itself is a super task. And we're also winning some time, because many things may happen in Russia, between Russia and the West, Russia and China, and Russia internally. It's a good thing that you paid attention to Israel, because Israel is not a NATO member, right? Like, say, same as South Korea. But just like South Korea, Israel is binded by bilateral agreement with United States. And many people here commented that this agreement between United States and Israel is not a guarantee. There are not enough strong statements about how Israel will be supported. But we see that on the 6th, on the 7th, when the situation happened there, America rushed to support it. And we actually had a good conversation with Israeli Ambassador Brodsky. I posted it on my channel. So the moment Israel was facing difficulties and conflict, 2 aircraft carriers were already in the area. So this situation is explosive for Israel and the world, and the United States definitely engaged immediately. This is the formula that we need to be going for. Israel didn't get this formula immediately, right? Yeah, there was Yuri, there was a big long fight in Israel to get that. So again, speaking in generalities, we need to, while we are stockpiling the efforts, while we are getting our potential up, if Russia violates the truce, we would need two American aircraft carriers here as well, or they need to find other means to show Russia that they are violating international guarantees for Ukraine, not an agreement between Russia and Ukraine, but international guarantees to Ukraine. And that's what Russia would be punished for. That's what we can talk about. That's when we have a chance for a long, successful strategy. It also may appear if we suddenly get our shit together and start to reform our economy and military-industrial complex and external politics and our army. But again, I'm skeptical about our capability to do that right now under that leadership. All right. So under our description, there is a link to the fundraiser for the troops of the 59th Brigade. Once again, it is their account. We have no touch to that. So whatever you're donating, it goes directly to that detachment. And please, all the military that needs any help, if you guys are there on the front, if you need any help from society at large, please send us your requests. We'll verify that you definitely are who you say you are, and we'll bring up the fundraiser. And they will record the videos with thanks so you guys can see the results of your work. Thank you, everybody who was with us. Channels of Alexey Arestovich, Yuri Romanenko, Alpha Media, and the Privateer Station. Have a good night. Bye.